if I want to start a software company and I say I'm going to make $1 million, investors are like, what? Who cares? What are you doing? That you think bigger, because it's not worth putting together a software company if you're only aiming for $1 million, right? But in a world where you don't have to put together a software company because you can make that $1 million by yourself in a much simpler environment, selling a very specific thing to the very specific people who want it, then it becomes possible. And that's the world I want to live in. That's where computers truly become like integrated into our lives, as opposed to creating like the world of haves and have-nots.
Tailscale is great because it's something no one with a lot of money would work on, but since it doesn't have a moat to trap users, it does actually disrupt others' moats, and so that's exciting. It's exciting for the individual. And by the end of the interview, I want our audience to understand how much potential Tailscale has to improve daily life with computers. With Tailscale, it's possible to build compute experiences as good as the best cloud experiences you've ever had. Actually, I would argue probably better than the best cloud experiences that you've ever had, but without relying on cloud computers and eliminating worries about unseen risks like, oh, I've stored all my data in Google. Is Google mining all of that data? Like, is it suddenly going to say, oh, this document matches the forbidden MD5 sum, you shan't access it? What's AI training running on my data? What's going on with that? There's no fear of any of that with Tailscale because it's running on your stuff. It's just the connectivity layer. I say just the connectivity layer, but it's required a lot of engineering.
Yeah, for sure. And so for the record, I just want to say, for any investors listening, don't worry, we're going to make lots of money.
I'm here with Avery from Tailscale. Would you like to introduce yourself? Like, you got to introduce Tailscale, but you also have to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Avery. I have been in the computer industry for like, I guess, a few decades now, from when I started writing software, I guess, in grade school, and then worked my way up, wrote my first Linux kernel drivers in high school. Started my first startup midway through university, which is a terrible idea. You should always make up your mind. Are you going to do university or are you going to start a startup? But of course, I did both. Sold that one to IBM in 2008. I worked at Google for a while on Google Fiber. I came out of Google and started Tailscale. So I've been doing a lot of stuff for a while. You might find my name on various different open source projects here and there. One of my favorite ones was the Debian popularity contest, which tracks how popular Debian packages are, what back in the day was really important for deciding which things go on CD number one, because CD number one was the only CD most people ever downloaded. But I do lots of stuff with statistics. I do lots of stuff with networking. And Tailscale is, of course, a networking software company. So I guess we're going to talk about that today.
Yeah, so I think Tailscale has the potential to be so disruptive and to become so ubiquitous as to how did we ever live without this on the internet, that it is very promising both for the individual and in kind of commercial scenarios. And because it's like, oh, I've got carrier grade net, I can't get an IP address. Doesn't matter. Your stuff that's running on your network will be as ubiquitous as something in the cloud. All the cloud convenience with none of the cloud lock-in, which is an exciting prospect.
The model of Tailscale is that it allows you to create direct connections between any devices anywhere in the world that you choose, and they're going to be encrypted and they're going to be controlled by your identity, and you can set access controls on them. And this sort of harkens back to the old days in the 1990s, where like that was what the internet was supposed to do. If you look back on the original vision of the internet, what was it supposed to do? It allowed you to create direct connections between any devices anywhere in the world. And oddly, that has fallen out. Like nowadays, it's actually really hard to do that. You can have a laptop, you can have your phone, and most of the time they can't talk directly to each other. Certainly if they're in two different places in the world behind two different firewalls, there's virtually no chance you can get them talking directly to each other. So if I want to send a file, like a photo from my phone to my laptop, the best way to do it is to send it up to the cloud and back again, which is almost like the antithesis of what the internet was supposed to be about, right? One of the first protocols of the internet was FTP, which just let you file transfer protocol between one computer and another. And that no longer works, basically, unless you're going through the cloud. And every time you go to the cloud, you're paying rent to somebody. So Tailscale is just this super lightweight layer that lets you eliminate this middle connection and go straight from one place to another really efficiently without adding any latency and while adding encryption.
The thing that occurred to me is building my own sort of Netflix from media that I own. Well, I say I own. I have VHS as well as DVD, but it's like the DVD. It's like it's already it's already a little sketchy. It's like, can I format shift that? I think I can format shift that, but in the, I should assert my rights to be able to format shift that. But what you just said, taken to its logical conclusion, Tailscale could end up being so disruptive that individuals wake up and want to reassert their property rights. It's like, hey, I bought this digital movie. I want to store it on my own drives. I want to stream it from my computer or my phone whenever I want to watch it. Famously, the PlayStation shut down their movie store, and they're just like, sorry about your luck. You can't get to the movies you bought anymore. Did we say buy? We meant rent.
Yeah, well, I mean that is something that, of course, has been bothering me for decades, I suppose. Is we're just like slowly tripping in this direction, and it's interesting how all this stuff came out, right? It's really like what you call path dependence. The internet evolved in this way. We made it impossible to connect one thing to another, so we made it impossible for your file server, which was like a fundamental element of computing for ever since like Windows 95 days. Right? But suddenly your file server is useless because it's not on the same network as you and you can't access it from all your devices wherever you are. And so what do we do instead? Well, we have to put these files somewhere. It's so hard to do that, to put it somewhere that isn't your machine, that now you have to pay a company to put those files somewhere. Well, they get to decide which files they put and which files and where they put them. And you have to pay them rent every time you want to download them, right? And because it's so hard to set that up, the rent is a certain price. Right? Even though this was the thing you could have just bought before and paid less.
A lot of the time, it's even a fundamentally broken experience. Like I have photos on my phone. I want to copy them to my computer. I am willing to plug in a wire. And, like iPhones for a long time, you only got an iPhone or a USB 2 interface on it's like USB 2, that's going to be 40 megabit. That's glacial when we're talking about tens of megapixel images. It's just, what do you mean you don't want to use the cloud to transfer your images?
Yeah, well, as a bit of trivia, wireless is eventually going to be faster than most wired connections. So we shouldn't even over focus on wired connection. But we should be able to make a wireless connection between my phone and my laptop and transfer files, right? And that is something that is really hard to do. If you have two Apple devices, if you have a MacBook and an iPhone, then you can use AirDrop, and that works sometimes. I rant with my friends all the time. It's like, I don't even understand why it doesn't work the rest of the time, right? Someone wants to send me a photo and it definitely worked 5 minutes ago, but now AirDrop is not working. And nobody knows exactly why that is. But Tailscale, if you're on the same Wi-Fi, it will make a connection between the two devices, sort of like magic. And it works even if it is not the same branded devices. You can transfer from an iPhone to a Windows box, from an Android phone to an iPhone, from an Android phone to a MacBook. Using a feature of Tailscale we call Taildrop, which is just like AirDrop, except it doesn't, it works with anything that has Tailscale installed, and it doesn't care about physical location. So you can be on the same Wi-Fi, or you can be anywhere in the world, and it'll find the direct connection between the two, and it'll send the files. And it doesn't go through us, it just goes through your devices.
I heard it works. I heard AirDrop, except it works reliably. Which is
yeah, some people have said that. It's actually a mystery to me why AirDrop doesn't work better than it does. Because it would be so neat if it did. You'd be locked into the Apple ecosystem, but it really should work better.
It doesn't work because no one wants to spend engineering dollars if you're not trapped in the moat. Basically, it's like we don't want to provide a good experience unless you are committed to giving us $10 a month for 2 terabytes of storage, and then maybe we'll give you a reasonable experience. Which I like you. I think we're aligned on this is not in anyone's best interest. But what's exciting here is, I'm sure you, like me, I've set up all this complication at home, and I can run, VPN software on my phone and connect to everything. But it really is magical about Tailscale, having used it for the better part of 2-3 years now, I guess, maybe 2-ish years. It really is like magic, like you say. It just works. It generally works incredibly reliably, even on very, very locked down networks. And like in the case of a phone, it's like I've got a choice between Wi-Fi and 5G a lot of the time. And it is very nice to say, well, I can get to resources on my own local network with the same ease and utility and ubiquity as a cloud service. And enabling that for people that are not super technical, I think, is the path to take over the universe, which it seems like you're well on your way to being able to do that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that you use the terms "it just works" and "it's magical," because we hear those things a lot from our users, and I have to keep telling our marketing team, we're not allowed to say those things, right? Because nobody's going to believe me if I say Tailscale is magic and it just works, right? I maybe sometimes get away with hey guys, you can download it from the App Store, onto your computer and on your phone, and then log in, and then it's done, and you'll be done in 5 minutes. And like people are like, 5 minutes, I bet he's exaggerating, but maybe I can get it done in like half an hour or a couple hours, right? But the truth is, it really is done in 5 minutes, and the only way anybody believes that is if their friend tells them, not if I tell them that. But yes, we have put a ton of work into just making like the network get out of your way and do what it's supposed to do without being in your face, which is a surprisingly difficult thing to do on a technical level. And the way most people approach it is never going to get you there. Most people want to add layers to the thing that's already complicated. And Tailscale actually goes down like at one of the lowest levels, like right where the internet protocol is. And it adds a couple of things to that. And then the rest of the stuff all works better on top. And as a result, it does feel magical. I think people well, my favorite quote from one of our customers is Tailscale makes the internet work the way you thought the internet worked until you learned how the internet worked.
I would say that it goes a step further. It makes the internet work better in a sense of I've set up a tunnel to be able to talk to my machine. So one of the, like on our user forum and in our user projects, popular thing to do is to set up Nextcloud and enable family sharing, and you upload photos and this kind of thing, or set up a blog. It's like, oh, let's set up a WordPress blog. It's easy, and it's the most popular blogging software, even though it's not terribly secure. And that's great until you realize that those services require care and feeding if they're on the public internet, because just anybody can connect to them. It's like, oh, I can log in with this form, but then you have people like brute forcing it. And so when I say Tailscale in some respects is better than the internet, is you give somebody a token and then they can access your tailnet, and that's cool, but you don't have to worry quite as much about the care and feeding of those services with Nextcloud or WordPress or whatever you happen to run, because they're not really on the public internet.
My model for this is basically like 0.01% of humanity is bad people, right? That's a really small percentage. But if you put something on the internet, all of those bad people, which adds up to like millions at 0.01%, right? All of them have access to try to break into your server and do bad stuff, right? So the whole internet has gotten to the point now where like everybody has to spend all their time worrying about this 0.01% of bad people who are going to make your life miserable unless you do a whole bunch of stuff to defend against them, right? And it's just, I mean, I'm Canadian, so there's this joke that like Canadians don't lock their front doors. And why do Canadians not lock their front doors? It's because our crime rates are low, and it's very unlikely that someone is going to come in our front door and cause a problem, right? And now some Canadians do lock their front doors, but you would be surprised walking up the street if you just tried to walk in somebody's front door, how many front doors would be wide open, right? And the reason it's wide open is because we created a safe environment where that's not a scary thing to do, right? The internet is a completely scary thing to do, to leave your door wide open. So what Tailscale does is it creates a private network for you and your friends and your associates or coworkers, however you want to define this network, with a lot fewer people on it. And it's as simple as that. When there's a lot fewer people, 0.01% is 0 people, right? When there's a lot of people, 0.01% can be millions of people. And so when you've got a small network, it's safe. You don't actually have to worry about patching WordPress to be the very latest version if it's a WordPress that's only shared with your friends, because your friends are not interested in breaking into your WordPress, right? And it completely changes the equation. We've gone so far down this path of like, we have to upgrade everything. We have to install the patches in like the moment it comes out, because otherwise I'm going to get manipulated, or my software is going to get broken, or people are going to attack me, and so on. And it's only because we've chosen to build a world that's unsafe. Right? We can live in a safe world, and then we can connect our little safe worlds to other people's little safe worlds, but with care and attention, right? Like if I want to run something that I want to share with other people, maybe it needs to be a little bit safer, but I can at least create a world where if they break into my WordPress server, they can't then take my WordPress server and say, haha, now I'm behind the firewall, I can break into everything else at the company, right? That's terrible, but that's the default way that IT stuff is deployed right now. Tailscale just sort of changes that entire equation.
Here at level 1, the audience is fairly technical, and when I looked under the hood, I was surprised at how elegant a lot of the solutions are to things like double NAT, NAT traversal, carrier grade NAT, because those are tricky situations to be able to establish a direct connection. Can you talk a little bit about how those workflows are enabled so that you don't necessarily have to end up with man in the middle relay? Like in most cases, these really are direct connections, even in challenged networking scenarios.
Sure. And that's really the key to Tailscale, right? Is that networking is hard as long as you can't make these direct connections, and people just sort of they hear what I say about Tailscale, and the answer from most technical people is like, well, that's impossible. You obviously didn't do that because it can't be done. And the answer is like, but it can be done, but it's very tricky. And I completely understand you, because up until now, it couldn't be done, right? So we have this great blog post that we published a few years ago by Dave Anderson. And it's called How NAT Traversal Works. And you can read it, and you might come away with an understanding of how NAT Traversal works. Most people come away with an understanding of why it's so hard. And like, oh, these Tailscale people must have done a lot of work, because I didn't understand like 3/4 of that. But nevertheless, there are a few tricks involved, but it fundamentally comes down to, you do not have to port forward anything. You don't have to change any settings on your firewall. Yes, it does work with CGNAT. Yes, it does work with double NAT. No, you don't need a static IP address. No, you don't need dynamic DNS or any kind of DNS. And most people, when they hear that, is like, okay, those are all the things that I knew about that would allow me to make a direct connection between one device and another. So how are you doing it without this stuff? And the short version is, I guess it is magic. It's in that blog post. There are various tricks that have been refined over the decades, but never put all in one place, and never put at the base internet layer like we do it. Like if you're using a video conferencing tool that uses WebRTC, it contains some of these tricks, right? If you're playing video games and it's trying to do peer-to-peer connections to minimize latency, it does some of these tricks. But all of these different tools and applications that do some of these tricks don't have enough incentive to get all the tricks done, because they make it good enough for their use case, and then they stop because they're selling something fundamentally different, and this is a distraction.
See,
right?
also the thing we started talking about.
Yeah, Tailscale, we're like, look, we're going to make a company, and we're going to solve this one thing, and we're going to so thoroughly solve it that you never have to think about it ever again. And if you integrate Tailscale into your app, if you have Tailscale installed, the problem is just gone. And once it's gone, the internet is a different place. And you sort of have to try it to believe it. No matter how many times I say it, you probably still won't believe me. But we did actually make the problem go away.
And so, in part to talk about that a little bit more, and in part to respond to investors from a developer experience, someone building some experiences with this and enabling enterprise functionality. The things that I jumped on to immediately is log forwarding, being able to track the ACLs, control with very fine granularity the access, and then also forwarding that to an external logging facility. So this looks like it would drop right in to an existing, it's like I want to use LDAP or, cloud-based Active Directory or some other third-party authentication service and programmatic ACL control. I could even do, infrastructure as code with the API, it looks like. So, can you speak a little bit more about that?
Sure. So what's fun about this peer-to-peer network, it's also known as a mesh network, is that a lot of the controls that companies expect to have in their network don't sound like they would be possible in a peer-to-peer network. And actually, the first thing people think or IT people think when they hear about this is like, oh crap, how am I going to defend against this? Because it's bypassing my firewall. That's the entire purpose of Tailscale, is to bypass the firewall. I put that firewall there for a reason, right? So the good news is Tailscale, we have built stuff in for this. The way Tailscale works is it is what we call a distributed firewall. So there is a central coordination server that sends rules to all the nodes in your network based on your settings. And each node has its own firewall and packet filter, and it filters the packets based on the global set of rules, but it distributes this packet filtering across the whole network. So one nice thing about that is the more nodes you add to the network, the more capacity you get for this packet filtering and firewalling. So you never have this problem where you've got a single firewall that is now overloaded because you put too much stuff in behind it, right? Each thing has its own firewall. The other really nice thing about it is we can also forward traffic logs from each of these nodes. So you, the administrator, can send rules to all your devices and say like, okay, well, I need to know which flows are talking to which other flows at which times, because I need to be able to do security monitoring, look for malware, that kind of stuff. And so you can then have each node log its packet flow information to a central server that can then be analyzed in your analytics tool or CM or whatever. The reason that is hard to exploit, so you can imagine like malware getting onto a node and saying, well, you know what, I'm not going to forward the packet logs after all, and therefore I'm going to be hidden, is that every connection in Tailscale is two-sided, right? So if you ever have a situation where one side is logging a flow, but the other side doesn't show the same flow, now you know something weird is going on. So we've built a distributed system that doesn't lose the control and auditability characteristics of your centralized system. And that's what makes Tailscale this like really neat system for even large enterprise networks. And I don't use the word zero trust networking very often, but people ask me about it, and so I'm forced to sort of answer. The answer is like, yes, Tailscale is a zero trust networking tool. I personally find that so many things identify themselves as zero trust networking that it doesn't really mean anything anymore. But my simple definition of zero trust networking is you don't need to trust the physical network anymore. You don't need to trust one device to enforce security on behalf of other devices. Zero trust is every device does its own security, never trust the physical network. And that's how Tailscale works.
One of the, implied by what you said, but I want to explicitly call out because it's so handy and so cool, is because each device is following its own rules and is doing its own filtering. If you desire centralized logging because of the distributed nature of that, you set that up. And then your clients is like, oh, something weird is happening across 4 or 5 or 6 of my clients. So the traffic was filtered, but you can still have a really good sort of early warning sign that something is not right. And because it is done in sort of a distributed fashion, it is very, very hard for an adversary to deal with the fact that you've got basically multiple sensors in your mesh that would go off at the same time to let you know something has gone sideways. So it's a nice side benefit of that architecture.
Yeah, and the other nice thing about it is like every device in the architecture has its own public key and its own identity, right? So you can't just like in the traditional world, like a person can't just like take a device, plug it into your Ethernet port inside your office and have access to a bunch of stuff, right? That's not how it works. Any new device is going to be visible in your inventory of devices. In fact, there's companies that are using Tailscale as their device inventory because they know that no device not on Tailscale has access to anything. Right. So therefore, now I've got a complete list of all the devices in my company. And if you've tried to run IT at an enterprise above any minimum size, you know that a lot of devices in your network are just completely unidentified and nobody knows why they're still there. Right. It can be a huge problem. And just the fact that they have cryptographic identity makes that problem go away too.
The legend of the server that was drywalled over and forgotten about and ran for 12 years.
Exactly. And it's like, it's great that works, but maybe you would have liked to know about it before it got unplugged 12 years later.
There's also, I want to call out specifically one of your more recent blog posts, The New Internet, which also touches on some of the ideas that we've had here. We've gone into some more detail, but there's also some more detail in the blog post. And if this was interesting, you should definitely check out The New Internet blog post because it echoes a lot of the same thoughts and feelings that I have about the happenings on the internet. And this is definitely a direction that if you're watching this video, you are probably already of the alignment that this is the direction that we need to go in, like we the people.
Absolutely. That's the dream.
Tailscale is going to be part of a couple of tutorials that I'm working on that will enable, like the Nextcloud and Docker and Portainer tutorials that we've done in the past. So imagine all that functionality, but it'll work not on the naked internet and behind carrier grade net. So if you're on Starlink, you can still access your petabyte sized movie collection at home, no problem. And Starlink's upload is enough that you can stream that in 1080p at like 4 megabit, no problem, even if you're on the other side of the world. So Tailscale does actually get it done, and if you've got less than 100 devices, it is actually completely free basically for these like home user scenarios. There's quality of life things you can pay for, but basically it's free.
Yep, yeah, it is free for up to 3 users and 100 devices, and we have a new Personal Plus plan in case you want up to 6 users. It's pretty affordable. It's a total of I think $5 a month on top of the free plan. You can double the number of users, so that gets you a whole family plus some of your friends usually.
Yeah, that is a much better value than pretty much any subscription-based streaming service at this point.
It's fine. I forgot to mention we also have an Apple TV app. So if you want, you can nowadays actually connect your Apple TV to this and be able to stream from your own video collection anywhere in the world. And you can use your Apple TV at home as an exit node when you're on untrusted Wi-Fi, and it just makes your network traffic look like you're coming out of home.
Oh, we completely forgot about exit nodes. So you can have one node on your network that handles traffic for the whole network.
Exactly. Yeah, you can set up any number of exit nodes in any number of locations and switch between them and just send all of your traffic through that exit node when you want to go out to the internet, which is really good for testing, really good for regional verification things, like my bank, for example, when I'm out of Canada, refuses to let me log in, which is very frustrating when I need to pay bills. So I use my exit node in Canada to log in as if I'm coming from Canada, and then everything's great. And there's also, you can also use your Apple TV or any Tailscale device as a subnet router. So instead of putting Tailscale on all your devices at home, like your printer, which is not possible, you can instead relay the local subnet onto your Tailscale network, and then you can access all your devices at home when you're not at home.
That's what I do.
Local IP.
Yeah, my the camera subnet for my house is literally not on the internet, but I can get to it.
That's really wise. Do not put your cameras on the internet, people.
Yeah. It you never know. It's like, oh, here's my Ring doorbell, and it's like, how many people have access to this Ring doorbell? 8,762 people, and it's like,
yeah. Well, if you look that one up, a lot of people have access to your Ring doorbell.
Yeah, fun times. All right. Well, this is thank you again. This has been a delightful interview. Check out the Tailscale blog. Go install it, and check out the thread on the Level 1 Techs forum. All right.
All right.
We'll see you there.
Thank you.